Bills and Dolphins. This one, huge implications. Basically, well, Mark, I'm going to let you take us through the implications of this one because you're like right on target with all of these, and I've just stumbled through them.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, there is some nuance to it, but ultimately, like these teams are playing for the AFC East crown and the 2 seed, and the loser is most likely going to be the 6 seed, right? So the loser ends up, going to Arrowhead. Now there are some, scenarios where I think if Buffalo loses, they could be on the outside looking in. Like I don't know if they've necessarily clinched yet, but in most of the scenarios, the loser of here is going to travel to Kansas City, and the winner is going to host the final wild card team in the AFC, whether that's Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, take your pick of, which one of those teams finds their way to the playoffs. But I think that's really what we're looking at here. And I think it's a fascinating game. I mean, I like the Dolphins getting plus money here. I want to see this status of Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, all the guys that were injured, Jalen Ramsey, going into this week. But Miami has been money at home all year. And I don't trust this Buffalo team. Like, I think that they've, failed to meet expectations the last couple weeks. They played as double-digit favorites and just kind of like scraped by the Chargers and the Patriots. And I'm not a firm believer that this Buffalo Bills team is, completely back. I know a lot of people had them pegged as like a team that could get hot at the end of the year and kind of run through the AFC. We always like to bag up, long futures prices, when they become available. They're definitely a talented team. But I just haven't seen – I have a lot of questions about this Buffalo Bills team in a must-win situation in a big game like this. So I'm kind of leaning towards the Miami side right now. I want to see where this number goes. Would love to get a 3.5, but definitely want to see, what, Waddle's status is going to be, Tyreek Hill, Mostert, Ramsey, all those guys.
Yeah, so the Bills, if they lose, they can still clinch a playoff berth with – Steelers loss at the Ravens or Jacksonville loss at Tennessee. So there are some other implications, I think, within that as well.
Okay.
I'm with you with the Bills. Like when they started winning a couple games in a row and everyone thought, okay, take them right now to win the AFC East. This is kind of the time to grab the Bills. They're going to make this big playoff run. Bills win this, Bills Super Bowl, not out of the question. I didn't really buy it. I did not put anything on them. I maybe should have just out of value-wise, but Josh Allen still turns the ball over a little bit. He's been quite a bit better at that lately, but that's still a concern, especially in some high-pressure moments. And they didn't look – Buffalo didn't look dominant against the Patriots this weekend, like won by a touchdown. They kept New England in that game or allowed them to stay in that game. So I think taking an underdog at home, that line is likely where it's at because of the status, the unknown status of some of those players. And I would imagine if they all are in on Sunday and healthy, that the line comes down a little bit and maybe you're getting like a 1.5 instead of a 3. Mm-hmm. But I think you'd have to take it with the Dolphins, especially coming off of a terrible loss. What happened earlier in the season between these two teams, because the Bills, this was in Buffalo, so Bills had a little home field advantage here, but 48-20 win over the Dolphins. But the defense was a little banged up. Like Jalen Ramsey was not playing in that game earlier on in the season. So I'm not sure. And that's when the Bills started the season decent before they kind of collapsed, right? Yep. I'm not sure you look at that game and can really take away like a whole lot from it in terms of who these two teams are right now. And to your point of Miami playing better at home, like they just beat the Cowboys at home, right? So it's such a week-to-week overreaction in the NFL of, I mean, we were just talking last week when they beat the Cowboys that Miami might be the best team in the NFL. Super Bowl bound, right? Dolphins are looking great. Yep. All of a sudden, Dolphins lose pretty bad to the Ravens and like, ooh, are the Dolphins for real? Like there's just so much week to week parity that it's hard to, trust a single narrative on some of these teams. I think the Dolphins are just fine. And if you're 3-point favorites, I mean, as I'm kind of talking myself into betting them as we go through this game right now, it makes a lot of sense.
And if you remember that previous game, Kate, where I believe that was after the Dolphins hung 70 on the Broncos, right? So it's you want to talk about like spots and how the the
Let
schedule kind of
down.
plays out. Yeah, this is a
Yep.
completely different situation. Now you're getting the Dolphins off an embarrassing loss, coming back home. Where before it
Yep.
was like, hey, they're coming off a game where they scored 70 points, and now they're have to travel on the road to Buffalo. So the spot is completely different than what we saw earlier in the season. But to me, it just comes down to like, I don't think the Bills are a team that plays well under pressure, and I think Miami's going to be highly motivated to win this game and make the playoffs and get that 2 seed, because home field advantage is very important for this Miami Dolphins team.
I mean, they did beat the Cowboys. That's impressive. You can't take that away from them, but barely beat the Chargers. A tough spot for Buffalo there, but beat the Patriots, beat the Jets a little bit earlier. So they have won 5 of their last 6 games, but a couple of those are against pretty subpar opponents.
The 6 seed's going to go to Arrowhead and play Kansas City. So you either have to go to Arrowhead and play Patrick Mahomes, and the Chiefs in round 1 if you lose, if you're Miami or Buffalo, and the winner gets the 2 seed and gets to play, either like Pittsburgh or Indianapolis or Houston or one of those teams, right, at home. So, especially if you're a team like Miami, you want that home game. Like, they're a much better team at home than they are on the road. So I think that's paramount for the Dolphins to get this win, as opposed to having to go to Kansas City and play, the Kansas City Chiefs. Even though Kansas City isn't what they are this year, isn't what they have been, it's still not a place you want to go in the first round of the playoffs.
No, I mean, if Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, whether or not the Chiefs have been up and down this season, I would still bet on Mahomes once post around, because it's a different game. It's a different animal, and going into Arrowhead is never easy during the regular season. During the postseason, it's even more tough. But it is going to be interesting if they do win that first round game in Arrowhead, then Mahomes has to go on the road, and that's something he's never done in his career. So that's going to be interesting to watch that and see, how he's able to perform in a road playoff atmosphere, when that's something which is crazy in his career that has yet to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're letting us know in the chat, I think there is some nuance as far as the Bills, like they could be out if they end up losing, if, the Steelers beat the Ravens, and, there are a couple things that could happen. But in most of the scenarios, you lose that game still gets in. But again, you don't want to have to travel to Kansas City, and have to deal with, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and those guys. Even though they haven't been the same, it's still, you'd much rather have that home game if you're Buffalo or Miami, right? Because Buffalo, pretty good home field advantage, especially if it's like a dome team like Houston or Indianapolis, having to travel to Buffalo to play in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a good point. The dome teams having to travel out there where it's likely to be snowy, it's likely to be cold. You get the elements, that's a little bit tougher. So to win the AFC altogether, Ravens is plus 150, Bills 4-1, Chiefs 4-1, despite possibly, those two needing to meet in the first round. Dolphins 6-1. Then you go Jags 13, Browns 18, and then Texans and Colts are up there, which, likely isn't going to happen. So, Mark, if you had to choose a team right now in the AFC to win that and make it to the Super Bowl, who's your pick?
It's the Ravens, but I'll tell you what, man. The Cleveland Browns at that number, pretty tempting. You look at that number, like that's a pretty tempting number. Kansas City getting them at this price, so you would talk to me in September, I'd have been like, oh, sign me up. But they are going to have to likely go on the road. And I like that Cleveland is going to draw the AFC South winner in the first round, right? So they'll have to go to, probably Jacksonville in the first round. I think that's a winnable game. Now, if they do win that game, most likely they'll head to Baltimore, and it's going to be, Joe Flacco revenge game. January Joe goes back to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, which is going to be a lot of fun. But, I don't know. I think at that number, it might be worth a little bit of a splash. It's the Ravens for me, but hey, I don't have to put all my eggs in one basket either.
Yeah, you can mix it around and throw some money on a couple different teams. And the Ravens, the knock against Lamar Jackson is playoff Lamar Jackson and what happens come postseason, how he performs. So you're getting Joe Flacco, who's red hot right now. Just a revenge game against the Jets last week on Thursday, and that turned out pretty well for old Joe. So yeah, the Browns at 18-1 is certainly something you should take a look at. As of last week, Campbell's been the favorite all year, so he drops down a little bit, but hard not to give it to Stefanski with what's happening in Cleveland and the Joe Flacco situation.
Yeah, and it's really a shame, man, because I think like D'Amico Ryans really deserves the award. Not that Stefanski doesn't, but if there was ever a case for like co-winners, like I think it's this one right here, because yes, Stefanski, winning with Joe Flacco and overcoming all the injuries is a tremendous story. But like D'Amico Ryans, like taking this Houston franchise and possibly catapulting them to the playoffs, I think is, he's done an amazing job. I mean, when he took that job at Houston, I was like, man, I love him as a coach, but Houston might not be the destination where you can have success. Like they were really bad on both sides of the ball. So, to see what he's done there is very, very impressive. But, I don't know. I mean, I think that both guys are deserving. I wouldn't be mad if either of them got it, but it's going to be a shame to see one of them not win the award.
I'm with you with the whole Ryan thing. Like, for coach of the year, of what you look for in that award, it has to be a little bit of what you're walking into and taking over. And you're taking over D'Amico Ryan, rookie head coach, his first head coaching job. He's taken over a franchise that had won like less than 10 games total over the last 3 seasons, something crazy. And all of a sudden he turns it around and has them 1 win away from making it into the playoffs. So I still would give Ryan's my vote, but Stefanski, with what he's done, all the injuries that they've had with Deshaun Watson, with Nick Chubb, all of a sudden you bring in Joe Flacco, things turn around. But to think that the Browns could be taking home coach of the year, comeback player of the year, and then Myles Garrett's the favorite for defensive player of the year, and it looks like he's going to run away with that one. So 3 award winners potentially out of the Cleveland Browns in a season that they lost their starting quarterback, their starting running back early on, a number of other players. Like, that's wild.
It really is wild. And it really is, like, considering how different this team is from what they were starting the season, right? Like, when the season began, we were like, okay, like, they brought in Jim Schwartz, so the defense might be okay. And if Deshaun Watson returns to the old Deshaun Watson, the offense is going to be prolific with Nick Chubb and Amari Cooper, and the defense will be good enough. And then lo and behold, we get to this part of the season, the defense has carried the team, one of the best defenses in the NFL, right? Joe Flacco comes in and saves the offense, and, Kevin Stefanski's got to get, credit for that. It's almost like the identity of the team completely flipped into what we thought they were. The defense was awful last year. Coming into the season, we didn't expect this, so you got to give some credit to Myles Garrett, right? And, Stefanski and what they've done with the team offensively with, Joe Flacco, it deserves all the credit in the world. But that's the funny part to me, is just how much things have changed, that the Browns have completely changed their identity and are still an 11-win team.
Yeah, completely different than what we had anticipated. Shane Steichen with the Colts, like in his first season there, he's done a fantastic job there. I mean, not the season that the Colts fans would have wanted, but still potentially could make the playoffs, which it is. I mean, I guess that comes down to who wins the Texans-Colts game, right?
Yeah. The winner gets in.
Looking at some scenarios
in that scenario, the winner will get in, the loser will be out. I think almost. I think that's pretty much, it's a win and get in, loser go home kind of matchup, because Pittsburgh's sitting there with 9-7. There's some other teams that they're going to squeeze out the loser. I think Pittsburgh has the tiebreaker with whoever loses there. So, and Steichen's done an amazing job too. Like Gardner Minshew, that defense is not great. The Jonathan Taylor issues in the beginning of the year that they had to navigate through. And again, he stepped into a situation, where, Frank Reich, opens up the pocketbook and convinces them to spend a bunch of money on Carson Wentz. That was a total failure last year. And he had to step in and pick up the pieces for that. And he did a tremendous job. I mean, it exceeded my expectations. If they beat Houston and get to the playoffs, I think he probably deserves consideration, with Stefanski. But all 3 of those guys, really, really had a huge impact. And I think that's awesome for the game. And I think it's awesome for the NFL to see these new hires. We always talk about the coaches that get hired and don't work out, but seeing these 3 guys excel the way they have this season has just been incredible.